Create a new 2D URP project. Find sprites for a bird, ground and pipe, and some backdrops and drag them into Unity. Select all of the assets and set the pixels to unit to the width of your bird. If you're using pixel art, set the filter mode to point no filter and the compression to none. Push apply. Select your main camera and change the background color to a nice sky blue. Drag the bird into the scene and add a new rigid body 2D component. Go ahead and set the gravity to 5. Add a circle collider 2D and adjust the radius to match your sprite. Now add a new script and call it bird. Open the script and create a new public float called flap speed and set it to 15. Add a private rigid body 2D reference called rigid and use get component to access it during start. In update, if any key down, set the rigid body velocity to vector2 up times the flap speed, and set the transform Euler angles to 45 degrees times the rigid body velocity y divided by the flap speed all times by vector3 forward. Now the bird can flap and rotate to match. You can also tweak the settings for gravity scale and flap speed. These won't be saved while you're in play mode, so you may need to set them after stopping. Drag the pipe into the scene and set its ordering layer to -1 so it's always behind the bird. Add a box collider 2D and tweak its size so it matches the sprite. Duplicate the pipe and move it above the original pipe, setting its Z rotation to 180. Drag one pipe onto the other in the hierarchy to make it a child. Now they'll move together. And set the X position of the child to 0 so they line up. Create an empty child object of the pipe and call it score trigger. Add a box collider 2D, click the edit button, and move it into place between the two pipes. Check is trigger. On the parent pipe, add a new script and call it scrolling object. Open the script and create two public floats for speed and end position, set to 4 and -10. In update, increase the value of transform position by the speed multiplied by vector3 left, multiplied by delta time to account for frame rate. If the X position is less than the end position, destroy the game object. Now the pipes scroll and get destroyed when they leave the screen. Drag the entire pipe object into the project to create spawnable prefab, and then delete the original from the scene. Create a new empty game object in the scene for our spawner and drag it to the bottom right outside the camera view. Add a new spawner script to that object. In the script, create a new public game object reference for our pipe prefab, and public floats for the random height as well as the spawn delay, set them both to 2. Finally, create a private float for the next spawn time. Create the onEnable method below start and use it to set the next spawn time to the current time. In update, if the current time is greater than or equal to that next spawn time, we'll make a new vector3 to calculate our spawn position, which will be our transform position plus vector3 up multiplied by a random range between minus the random height and the random height. Now instantiate the pipe prefab at that spawn position and use transform.rotation as the rotation. Finally, increase next spawn time by the spawn delay. Back in the scene, drag the pipe prefab into the slot on the spawner object. Now your pipe should be spawning at regular intervals. You can tweak the values in the inspector to change the behavior. You may also need to move the spawner object up or down to get it to center in the right place. To make the player lose when they hit a pipe, in the bird script, create the onCollisionEnter 2D method. If the script's enabled, we'll just disable the script. Now you lose control whenever you hit a pipe. To restart the game, we'll add a UI button to the scene, import TextMesh Pro Essentials if it prompts you, a huge canvas will appear, double click it in the hierarchy to zoom. Move and resize the button to where you want it, select the child text object, enter a message, and tweak the font settings to your liking. The code for this will go in the spawner script. At the very top, add using Unity Engine scene management so we can load scenes. Make a public void restart method and use the scene manager to load the active scene by build index. Find the button in the scene and add an event. Drag the spawner into that event and select the restart method. Now we can click our button to restart. Uncheck the entire button object so it's hidden at the start of the game. In the bird script, create a public game object reference for the retry button, and within onCollision, we'll set it to be active so the button appears. And don't forget to drag that button into the bird script in the inspector. And now the button only appears when we lose. Drag the ground into the scene. If it's too small, choose the tiled draw mode and set a width that's at least double the camera's view. Add a box collider 2D and adjust the X value of size so that it matches the object. Duplicate it and drag it to the top of the screen to stop the player flying off the top. Drag in the scrolling object script to the bottom copy and we'll modify it so that the ground can infinitely scroll instead of getting destroyed. Add a public bool, destroy at end, and set to true. Add a public float teleport distance and set it to 20. Add an if statement around our destroy code to check if we're destroying at end. Then add an else statement to move the transform position to the right by our teleport distance. Untick destroy end on our ground object. The ground should now scroll infinitely, though you may need to tweak the settings for these new variables to make it work. Add a new UI text mesh pro for the score counter and move it to where you want it. Make the default text 0, center the text, and tweak any other font settings. In the bird script, add using TM Pro to the top so we can edit text objects. Add a public text mesh pro UGUI reference for the score text and a private int to store the actual score value. Set it to 0. Add the onTriggerEnter2D method, and if the script is enabled, we'll increment the score and set the score text to the score converted to a string. Drag the score text object into the bird script. Now the score increases whenever we hit the trigger on a pipe. To prevent the bird falling as soon as you press play, untick simulated on the bird's rigid body. Disable the spawner script too. In the bird script, add a public spawner reference, and when we press a key in update, we'll recheck simulated and the spawner, and drag the spawner script into the bird script in the inspector. Now the game doesn't start till we press a key. We're almost there. Drag sounds for bump, flap, and score into the project, and add an audio source to the bird. Lower the volume. In the bird script, add 3 public audio clip references for the flap, bump, and score clips. Also add a private reference for the audio source component. Like the rigid body, we'll find the component at start. In our flap code, use the audio source to play the flap clip as a one-shot sound. Add similar lines to the collision and trigger methods for the other sounds. Now drag the 3 clips into the inspector. And that's Flappy Bird, but let's go for some bonus points. Let's add scrolling background objects like clouds. Drag sprites into the scene and set the order in layer to -2. Now tweak the color alpha so that they blend in. Add the scrolling object script flip some by making the X or Y scale negative, and set the settings so that they slowly loop behind the scene. We can also add some code into the update of the spawner script to let the game restart when we press the R key down. I've been Mug, and this has been Flappy Bird in under 8 minutes. Please click some thumbs, bells, tell me what to make next, and subscribe.